We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we have something very wacky and weird that we found on YouTube, an interview. But warning, trigger warning, extensive and graphic discussion of cultic drug use and child sexual abuse. So don't let your children in the room to hear this sort of nonsense. And this deceiving title here says, what in the world was Jesus doing with a naked kid at 4 a.m. in a public garden? Dr. Ammon Hillman, this guy here, got tattoos, etc. He rambles on, he says this and that, and it's just nonsense. It's blasphemy, etc. Okay, we put a comment in regards to his book, The Chemical Muse, Drug Use and the Roots of Western Civilization, which we'll have a look at in a moment, by D.C.A. Hillman. This guy's got a PhD. Hypnosis, the Fast, with the last wild frontier of classical studies, the Times UK. The Chemical Muse uncovers decades of misdirection and obfuscation to reveal the history of widespread drug use in ancient Rome and Greece. In the city-states that gave birth to Western civilization, drugs were an everyday element of a free society. Yeah, if you came across some sort of weed out there growing wild and knew what it was all about, well, who's to stop you from using it, unless the Romans or who were in power or authority said, hey, cut that out, right? You're not to pick that and use that, etc. But there would have been medical people, physicians who probably used natural herbs, etc. Put you into a state, like a sedative, whatever, and healed you, that sort of stuff, right? They're experimenting. In the city-states that gave birth to Western civilization, drugs were an everyday element of a free society. Often they were not just available, but vitally necessary for use in medicine, religious ceremonies and war campaigns. Their proponents and users existed in all classes, from the common soldier to the emperor himself. Okay, because in those days you were prone to sickness, illness, early death. You're lucky to live past 20 apparently. Even lucky if you reach 30. Most people were like dead. They're either pillaged, raped, slaughtered by invading armies, barbarians, all that sort of stuff, Romans. So yeah, you're constantly at risk, under threat. Okay, no matter who you were. Citing examples in myths, medicine, and what's this got here? The proponents and users existed in all classes, from the common soldier to the emperor himself. Citing examples in myths, medicine and literature, D.C.A. Hillman shows how drugs have influenced and inspired the artists, philosophers and even politicians whose ideas have formed a basis for civilization as we know it. We even know it today. Many of these ancient texts may seem well known, but Hillman shows how timid, prudish translations have left scholars and readers in the dark about the reality of drug use in the classical world. Hillman's argument is not simply pro-drug. Instead, he appeals to an intellectual honesty that acknowledges the use of drugs in ancient societies despite today's conflicting social moves. In the modern world, where academia and university life are often politically charged, the Chemical Muse offers a unique and long overdue perspective on the contentious topic of drug use and freedom of thought. And there's a link to his ebook apparently. You can probably download that. I'm not too sure if you've got to sign up and then download it. We've tried to find it and download it to read it extensively, but most of them are like don't work, or you've got to sign up with your email, etc. to get a copy, and then you find it say like 2 pages of the entire book, stuff like that. Okay, so we put another comment, because he reckons in Mark 14 of the Bible, the original manuscripts, etc., that, as this deceiving title reads, Jesus was with a naked kid at 4 a.m. in a public garden, all this sort of stuff, that he was a child abuser, all this sort of stuff, that his disciples were like 10 years old, all this sort of crap, right? Okay, so we will look at what it actually says there in the original ancient, very old Galilean Aramaic Gospel of Mark, translated into the nearest English equivalent by a native-born Aramaic translator, Victor N. Alexander from Bet Narain, or Mesopotamia, Syria. He's got at least 20 to 30 years experience translating those into the nearest English equivalent. Okay, so Mark 14, was it 45 or something? And while he spoke, there came Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, and many people with swords and clubs from the chief high priests and scribes and priests. And the betrayer, Judas, gave signals to point out the one he would betray, i.e. Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah. And he said, the one that I kiss, or Greek, salutate, give that salutation. It is him, seize him, alert thee and take him away. Because he's been paid 30 silver coins, right? By the priests. And at his appointed time, he approached and said to him, Rabbi, Rabbi, and he kissed him. Okay, so 45 has a footnote indicator there. We're going to have a look at the bottom down here to see what that actually indicates. Literal Aramaic idiomatic expression, after his hour. Okay, it was that moment that Jesus was chosen through God to betray the Son of God, right? It's a specific hour that he would do that. Then they, the temple guards, etc., threw hands on him and seized him. One of those standing there broke out of the sword and struck the servant of the chief high priest and took off his head. Okay, supposedly that was Peter, right? But here it doesn't say it was him. However, Yeshua Mashiach, or Jesus the Messiah, replied and said to them, like against a criminal you came out against me with swords and clubs to seize me. Every day I was with you as I taught in the temple, and you did not arrest me, except it is so as scriptures may be confirmed that this is happening. It was prophesied, right? Then his disciples left him and ran. Yeah, because obviously they feared for their life, and they took off. And there was a young man who followed him, and he was barely attired. He was barely clothed, right? And they seized him, these temple guards, etc., the priests. They seized him, but he left his only outfit and ran naked. Okay, so here's a footnote indication. 1452. And it reads, literal Aramaic idiomatic construction. He, however, left his outfit. Okay. He wriggled out of it and ran away because he didn't want to go to prison either, did he? Didn't want to be taken away. And then they took Yeshua, or Jesus the Messiah, to Caiaphas, chief of high priests, and they gathered with him all the chief high priests and the scribes and priests. So it does not say in those original Galilean Aramaic manuscripts, hidden and preserved by the original ancient, very old Apostolic Church of the East, when translated into the nearest English equivalent by the native-born Aramaic-speaking translator Victor N. Alexander, that it was a minor, that it was a kid, etc. So all this crap saying that Jesus was selling kids or using kids to get drugs, he's part of a sex cult, all this sort of crap that this guy says, reckons, right, and this guy believes him. Yeah, it's all crap. Yeah, this guy is probably a drug user, probably tripping balls, all that sort of stuff. We don't know that, but yeah, the way he talks and shuffles and carries on, you'd think, that he was on the drugs. Okay, there's lots of people that added comments here below that say similar. Okay, we think this guy's on drugs. Okay, this guy's a blasphemer. Apparently he had other videos where he actually said hail Satan and all this sort of stuff and so forth. Okay. Yeah, some joke around. One said he has mummy issues. Jesus was falsely accused, isn't he, everyone? There's a smell test. Something doesn't seem right here. I think he's a product of that special recruitment he touched on let's see, maybe MK Ultra or was it MI6? Okay, John was his cousin. He was born before Jesus. What the hell, dude? You're making stuff up. They all existed long after Jesus' year. And so forth. He looks like a Satan worshipper himself and probably engages in the practices and wants to paint Jesus this way. This guy's a scientist and his experiences with Mother Mary is undeniably, etc., etc. All this sort of stuff. Okay, and religious claims, right? Satan, all this sort of stuff. Okay, and these thousands of these comments, but our other one got lost in amongst the thousands of comments that were already here. It's usually the story, right? But it was basically proving that the book of Mark didn't say it was a kid, and that the disciples weren't 10 years old and all this sort of crap. Yeah, it's just total baloney, total blasphemy on this guy's behalf. And he reckons he got it all from the original manuscripts, texts, etc. Well, we just checked it out, and we don't know which ones he's getting it from. Probably from the Greek or something like that, you know. Making all these bold claims, but he hasn't said, right, okay, this is exactly where it's from on this particular video. Okay, and he's some sort of bacteria specialist. People make jokes in regards to him about it. But some support his rants. Okay, and here it's got Matthew was a tax collector for the Romans, because he's one of the disciples, right? The Romans definitely would not employ a young boy to procure their tax collections. Couldn't be trusted, right? Might run off. Hey, get at least I got all this money. Let's party. Peter had a mother-in-law, therefore he was married. Just these two apostles blows Ammon's statements. As quoted from interview, all of the apostles were teenage boys, all of them in quote. It is obvious Ammon has been through many traumas. He seems high on something. He constantly fidgets and appears to have PTSD from SA. He no doubt is church hurt, as many others are from cultist type religions, including the satanic religions. Yeah, he mentions that he knows about cults and all this sort of stuff. Probably dabbled in them. He had a vision of Sophia or something like that. Accusing his only true Saviour, Jesus, of such evils, etc., etc. There's a saying, we hurt the ones we love the most. Ammon is trying to hurt Jesus because he feels betrayed by those who claim to represent him. These are all these people's own personal opinions on this particular guy and what he had to say. Possessed the worst. Reminds this guy of Nefarious. Don't know who that is. Okay, there's plenty more comments here. So we're going to jump now and look at this particular book. We tried to download it and just got mucked around. So we just have a quick look at what he has to say in this book. His book. Okay, it may not show us the whole thing. Oh, here we go. His introduction. Oh my gosh, it's jumping all over the place. Just his contents in it. This particular book, chemical use, etc. His introduction, that he should have seen it coming after a decade of tireless study in both the sciences and the humanities, thousands of dollars in student loans, 2 master's degrees, hundreds of hours of grading papers and working with students of his own, and a series of rigorous proficiency exams, designed more than anything else to scare him into knowing as much as he could about everything that had happened over 2,000 years ago. He sat in the only suit he could afford, awaiting the verdict on his dissertation exam. The 5 professors who made up his committee had grilled him for more than 2 hours without a single compliment or even a hint of encouragement. They seemed to be preoccupied with just one particular chapter of his 250-page thesis. He shouldn't have been surprised. His paper's larger topic, the use of medicinal drugs in the Roman Republic, was accepted, but what they disliked was the chapter in which he wrote about the Roman penchant for recreational drugs and the prevalent use of psychotropics by just about everyone in antiquity, farmers and aristocrats alike. When the committee called him into the room, nobody was smiling, not even his advisor, They detained him for another hour or so and then left the room one by one. Not a single member of the committee gave him the traditional congratulations, doctor, handshake, or wished him luck on a bright academic future. When everyone, congratulations, doctor, handshake, or wished him luck on a bright academic future. When everyone but his advisor had exited the room, he humbly asked her if he had passed. It was at that point in his life that he first discovered the fine line between intellectual compromise and total capitulation. The choice was simple: take out the chapter on the ancient world's recreational drug use and any references to narcotics in the rest of the dissertation, or fail the exam. Hillman had seen the evidence for himself, and he knew his conclusions were sound, but it seemed obvious that the committee just didn't like the implications of a drug-friendly Western society. After all, the most vocal member of his committee, the head of the department, had refuted his conclusion that the Romans used recreational drugs, with the seemingly non-academic response: they just wouldn't do such a thing. After years of research, the best that academia had to offer was an anachronistic presupposition. We think drugs are bad, so why wouldn't they? Yeah, we weren't in those times, so we don't know. They could have used something to relieve their boredom or whatever, make life more exciting. The author felt as if he hadn't gotten his day in court. He was being forced to bury the truth in order to fulfill some sort of moralistic agenda. He knew the founders of Western civilization used recreational drugs. Yeah, there's mushrooms, etc., etc. You have a look at those old churches in England, etc., all over the place, and those windows, glass stained windows, have got these red and white mushrooms on there, and brown mushrooms, etc. Supposedly the whole Father Christmas theme, it's got reindeers and all this sort of stuff, and mushrooms, supposedly in Norway, where it was supposedly first created. I'm not too sure on that. These people saw these deer that had chewed up these mushrooms, obviously off their brain, right, because of these things. So they tried it, and they saw dwarves and sleighs and all this Father Christmas type thing, all this sort of crap, right? Yeah, so it was then introduced into modern culture over time, right? Okay. Okay, so he knew that the founder of Western civilization used recreational drugs, and he had plenty of examples to prove it, but nobody wanted to hear that. So he did the only thing: he tucked his scholarly tail between his legs and deleted the sections in his dissertation on narcotics, stimulants, and psychedelics. This pleased the members of his committee, especially those most adamantly or stubbornly opposed to the thought that the greatest minds of antiquity might have indulged in drugs. Within 2 or 3 days, they had all signed his degree warrant, and presto, he became a PhD. Several months later, he decided that the facts that he learned as a grad student were too important to remain hidden by overly conservative academics. After continuing his research into drugs he decided to take his case to the public. He wanted to present the facts to anyone interested, to put as much evidence on display as possible, and to let everyone outside of academia reach the conclusions for themselves. During his tenure as a doctoral student, he had found an excellent book on the history of opium, published by Thomas Dunn, publisher of his own imprint at St. Martin's Press. The author wrote up a proposal and fired it off. A few months later, he found that he would indeed have his day in court. In writing The Chemical Muse, he wanted to show that recreational drugs were an integral aspect of the same societies that gave us valuable concepts like democracy and the scientific method. He wanted the modern West to see that its founding fathers, is that the church fathers or the American founding fathers, were drug users, plain and simple. Or maybe of the religion, right? Plain and simple, they grew the stuff, they sold the stuff, and most important, they used the stuff. The modern anti-drug campaign is not a democratic movement at all. The ancient world didn't have a Nancy Reagan. It didn't wage a $1 billion drug war. It didn't imprison people who used drugs, and it didn't embrace. So sobriety as a virtue. It indulged, and from this world in which drugs were a universally accepted part of life sprang art, literature, science, and philosophy. In order to understand the demand for narcotics and the prevalence of psychotropic drugs in antiquity, it's important also to understand the harsh reality of life several thousand years in the past. The first chapter of this book, The Chemical Muse, is all about the risks, injuries, and disappointments that dominated life in ancient Greece and Rome, and offers some examples of the great minds produced in this ancient crucible. Plagues, natural disasters, poor sanitation, and wars keep pressure on the biological struggle for survival. This guy's a biochemical, maybe bacteria expert, right? It's part of his doctorate, okay, his profession. Life was truly difficult, and the most likelihood of your making it to your 7th, 8th, or 9th decades was dramatically lower than it is today. The ancient world didn't worry about heart attacks, strokes, or diabetes. Their killers were the elements or their harsh environment, not poor diet and lack of exercise. Yet, despite such harsh circumstances, classical civilizations gave birth to the ideas that would guide cultural development of at least 3 continents for almost 2,000 years after its decline. As a result of rampant disease and endless variations of physical suffering, the ancient world turned to drugs for the treatment of specific ailments and many forms of pain relief. Ancient medicine, championed by such figures as Hippocrates and Galen, relied heavily on botanicals, all these natural plants and herbs, etc., in the treatment of disease. Ancient medical texts, many of which have never been translated from the original Greek and Latin, are full of descriptions of potions, salves, ointments, purgatives, plasters, and all sorts of other complex medications. Okay, so you did have that, what is supposedly the Medici in those days, and these physicians in Egypt, etc., that knew these kind of things. It's safe to say that when the Greeks and Romans got sick, they inevitably turned to drugs, as described in this book's 2nd chapter. Antiquity's drug knowledge was the result of hundreds, if not thousands, of years of trial and, no doubt, error with local plants and vegetation. Like other cultures, the Greeks and Romans found out that some botanical species could treat wounds, some could ease pain, others could even prevent pregnancy, and they used them without reservation. In chapter 6, the author examines the subject of inspiration as it applies to writing and highlights several ancient authors who used the image of drugs and drug users to create their own peculiar genre of drug-inspired literature. These authors not only spoke of psychotropics but actively appealed to drug-using audiences who could fully appreciate the image of intoxication. The author uses the works of 3 storytelling artists, namely Homer, Virgil, and Ovid, to show that the classical world's greatest writers clearly accepted recreational drugs as a foundational element of their culture. While nobody in a drug-friendly society like that found in antiquity would feel pressure or have reason to publicly admit to their own use of mind-altering chemicals, these 3 individuals betray a knowledge of drugs that can only have come from first-hand use or experience. Indulging in them, right? Chapter 7 and 8 address the effects that drug use has had on the philosophy of Western society and the democratic form of governance the ancient world produced. Here, the author looks at the development of early Greek philosophy under the influence of psychotropic and narcotic substances. In chapter 7, he tries to answer some of the more important questions presented by an awareness of the ubiquity of mind-altering substances in Greece and Rome. For example, did drug use affect the development of Greek ideas about humanity's place in the universe? In chapter 8, the author looks at the fruit of the drug-influenced psyche, which is none other than democracy itself. In the conclusion, he tackles the question, what does all this mean? So the Greeks and Romans used recreational drugs. What implications can we find for our modern world? History presents us with myriads of upright, important, brilliant, vibrant people who made positive contributions to the development of the world around us while using drugs. In reading this book, you may come to the conclusion that the West would not have survived without these so-called junkies and drug dealers, and you, as a beneficiary of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, would not be an heir to the freedom of which the Western world has been known for centuries. So that would explain why you got these really weird, non-understandable paintings. They're like real weird, but they're fascinating, right? Everyone else finds them fascinating, these people might have been on drugs, and these Renaissance painters, okay, like Vincent van Gogh, etc. Maybe he was tripping and he cut his own ear off or something like that. Yeah, who knows? By accident. Information contained in a chemical muse will not make this author popular, never made this author popular. Recreational drug use is an aspect of our history that has been dutifully covered up and effectively ignored for the past 1500 years. It may cast a shadow on the great statesmen, poets and philosophers that we have held up as paragons of virtue over the centuries, and it may make us think twice about some of our modern assumptions about the ancient world. But it is a story that needs to be told. The author does not regret opening Pandora's box. If that's what the chemical muse achieves, he will have managed to regain a bit of his idealism and courage from his years as a graduate student. Finally, the author would be remiss in his duty to the work at hand if he failed to mention briefly a strange incident that took place immediately before the doctoral examination that sparked this entire project, or this book. As he waited nervously in his office, trying to anticipate the barrage of questions that would come his way, a kindly-looking grey-bearded man appeared at his door and asked if he could answer a question. The author could answer a question. Taken by surprise, he replied that he was just about to go to the most important exam of his career, but that he would be glad to indulge him for a few minutes. Completely unaffected by the quiet of his situation, the old man asked him a question he'd never forget. With a pleasant but slightly disturbing smile, he said, "Why do you think the gods killed Actaeon?" Actaeon was a hunter in Greek myth who stumbled upon the goddess Artemis while she was bathing. Incensed, she turned him into a stag, a type of deer, or moose or something, whereupon his own hunting dogs devoured him or ate him up. In response, they attacked him and ate him. In response to his question, the author flippantly said, "Well, I guess the gods don't like peeping toms?" Without pausing to acknowledge the absurdity and sarcasm of his response, the strange fellow proceeded with his own answer. He said, "I think it's all about the violation of the sacred. You see, the gods killed Actaeon because he saw too much, and that's what happens when you go beyond the limits of your fellow mortals." With that, he wished him, the author, good luck and walked away, and the author didn't think twice about their little conversation, but ran headlong into his fateful meeting. At the time, the author admits, he thought this gentleman must have been a bit of a kook. After experiencing the disaster of his dissertation examination, he couldn't help but feel a bit like a man devoured by his own allies. Like someone punished by the gods for seeing too much. In a way, the old man let the author know what was about to happen to him, and thus left him with a key to understanding his own fate. For that, he humbly thanks him, whoever that old guy was. He brought hope and prosperity. Oh, okay, get back a bit. We missed a bit. Yeah, where's that bit? The ancient crucible. It goes on about the Greeks. The Greek knew and felt the terror and horror of existence. Friedrich Nietzsche. 2,000 years ago, life was nothing less than endless struggle for survival. The cultural milieu of the ancient Greeks and Romans, something we now call classical civilization, gave birth to venerated institutions and ideas like Western philosophy, the scientific method, and democratic governance. Yet it was neither idyllic nor romantic. Antiquity saw the birth of humanism and political freedom, concepts that brought hope and prosperity to the West and ultimately sparked the Renaissance and Enlightenment. But the ancient world was very much a place of overwhelming anguish. Greece and Italy were home to renowned authors and statesmen like Pliny, the natural historian, Pericles, the democratic reformer, and Julian, the Roman emperor, who tried in vain to break Christianity's stranglehold on state affairs. But in the midst of such psychologically liberating tendencies, distress and misery were accepted facts of life, cruel torment sent by a host of merciless gods. Men and women died 1,000 preventable deaths in antiquity, where existence was oftentimes a sorrowful tragedy, a pitiful farce that opened with a chorus of grieving mothers and closed with the entire cast's premature exit. Natural disasters, fatal diseases, and unending warfare dogged man's every step from womb to pyre. It's like funeral mound, right? Like the Vikings did when someone died, they put them on there and burnt them, right? To ash, like maddening furies. Volcanoes, epidemics, and vicious combat brought death and destruction, claiming the lives of the famous and the infamous alike, along with history's forgotten multitudes. The devastatingly harsh conditions that prevailed forged literary traditions characterized by equal proportions of pessimism and passion. See all the problems they had in those days of iniquity? Hey, that's why you didn't live long. You're lucky if you live past 20, and so forth. Modern audiences often fail to appreciate the ancient world's understanding of the transience of life, and thereby misread Greek and Latin literature. Scholars, Hollywood, and now a now vanishing breed of high school Latin teachers see much more of themselves in ancient peoples than actually exists. Give them a toga and a laurel wreath and they suddenly think they're Julius Caesar. However, history just doesn't work that way. Time and social evolution have changed the ways we live and die, and thus our experiences as a species. Today, the West views death as an endogenous process, the breakdown of the body, while ancient Greeks and Romans saw it as the result of uncontrollable external forces. Catastrophes kill them, we kill ourselves. Fatty foods, indolence, and history of smoking give most of us moderns that ignominious heart attack, stroke or cancer that escorts us to our resting places. However, in antiquity, plague, famine, and hand-to-hand combat cut life short. Those who managed to live long were champions of a small but resilient minority. They were a select few, constantly aware that most of their contemporaries were not so lucky. Accordingly, sorrow, pessimism, and anxiety form a strong undercurrent in classical literature, produced as it was by those who survived the diseases and wars that dominated ancient life. Classical myth, the lifeblood of Western society, is endowed with a spirit of tragic evanescence, a heartfelt communion with the metaphysical reality that life is painful and fleeting. 2 millennia ago, people were capable of living just as long, modern post-industrialists, but most didn't. Harsh environmental factors lowered the average survival rate in antiquity, but it's important to understand that the biology of human life was no different. People are not capable of living longer today than they did then. They just managed to dodge the statistical bullets of the ancient world. Although it's impossible to put a number on the average life expectancy of the classical world with any accuracy, the written records left behind by the Greeks and Romans make it clear that it was much lower than it is today. Much of the great psychological burden imposed by the harsh living conditions of ancient life has been alleviated, making it difficult for us to fully appreciate the customs, values, and more found in ancient literature. More important, a great demographic gulf presents us from understanding several facets of the classical world that have been intentionally ignored by modern scholars, namely the widespread use of mind-altering substances, antiquity's enduring obsession with drug-wielding sorcerers, and the profound influence of narcotics on the development of Western literature and society. Again, then it continues. There's quite a lot of pages here. You might get to 138. We're not really sure on that. Practically reading the whole book without having to buy it or something like that. Okay, so we hope that this video has opened your eyes to the weird and the wacky, people's claims of this and that in regards to Jesus, the disciples, and supposed events that went on in his day. And these people that come up with all these ideas, oh yeah, Jesus was this, Jesus was that, the disciples were this, the disciples were that. Perhaps Judas was gay because he gave Jesus a kiss. All this sort of stuff, right? They come up with all these theories, right? And they say, oh, it's all fact, because I researched it and I found this, these so-called experts, etc. But they could be like this guy on some wacky medication or drug, or disillusioned, or or the devil and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we hope that it's opened your eyes to this particular guy. Okay. and similar, right? There's a lot of wacky ideas out there, blasphemies, whatever, saying, oh, I've done the research, I got the PhD and all this, and I did this and that, and blah, 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 right? Just be wary as a believer in God and the Christ. Okay, don't be swayed by these claims. Yeah, these titles are put up here to be eye catchers. Okay, get your attention, get you interested in what these interviews, etc., have to say. Okay, most times they are just false for that reason, and to catch your attention, get you interested. It's a style of clickbait, right? You know, it can be a style of clickbait. It's a way to get you watching. Okay, and more time you spend watching their videos, possibly the better their statistics will be, their ranking, their views count a lot, right? We got told, we always thought it was about getting subscribers, all this sort of stuff, but it was actually it's all to do with views. It's your views, yeah. Then you get the subscribers, right? Your headings, you know, you have to have a good thumbnail, a good video title. It's got to be all catchy, right? So get your people's attention. If you put Jesus was with a kid, you know, it's not so interesting. But if you put something like clickbaity like that, right? Okay, often you end up finding a video doesn't even touch on that topic, right? But these are bold claims, and we proved through the original ancient, very old Galilean Aramaic scriptures, translated by Victor Alexander, that this is a load of rubbish, right? Okay, they've taken the text, the scriptures, and they've twisted it. Okay? This guy, oh no, I'm not a Christian, or I used to be, I'm not an atheist, or this sort of stuff. But then he has other videos people say where he says, "Hail Satan." Okay, yeah, okay. So if you liked it, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, put your comments below the video, get back to you on those as soon as we can, and then go share it with all your family, friends and others. They may find it really interesting, have a good laugh. Just check that they're not on some substance, because you might not be able to stop them from laughing. Yeah, make people aware of it, especially the religious Christians, Jews, Muslims, that this kind of carry on is rampant, right?